Andy Weber was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Program, whose area of responsibility are U.S. nuclear, chemical, and biological defense programs. And I'm smiling when I say this because it is a huge amount of responsibility. I mean, just one of those portfolios would be enough.
Well, I used to say we had the luxury of just focusing on three things only, nuclear, chemical, and biological. And that was a great privilege to serve in that job under President Obama's administration.
Does the U.S. have any chemical weapons or nerve agents left?
Well, we're at the very tail end of destroying our entire Cold War arsenal in a safe manner under Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons supervision.
Why is that so important? I mean, these things were meant to kind of match the enemy. And then at a certain point, there was a shift in thinking where people said strategically, you know what, we don't want these in our arsenals at all. What happened?
Well, the Cold War ended, in short. I mean, the horror of World War I and the use of chemical weapons led to the Geneva Convention. And then as the Soviet Union was collapsing, we negotiated and finalized the Chemical Weapons Convention, which banned all chemical weapons and had a very specific series of steps for countries that had chemical weapons to destroy them in a verifiable, permanent way. So it's been very, very successful until recently when we saw massive violations by the Syrian regime, and then these two recent attacks in 2018 and last week, the use of a very sophisticated military chemical weapon called the Novichok agents in assassinations.
So let's talk Russia and Novichok. It's been identified as the substance given to the opposition figure Alexei Navalny. Are the Russians being framed for something they didn't do? Because that's what they say is happening.
No, that's outrageous. That's just typical denial, deception. We know the facts. The fact is that a laboratory in Germany, a very sophisticated military laboratory, was able to confirm not just that chemical weapons were used in this heinous attack against the opposition figure Navalny, but a very specific, special kind of chemical weapon called Novichok that is only available illegally available in a very tightly secured Russian military supported laboratory.
Are they supposed to have it at all?
No, they're definitely not supposed to have it. This is a banned chemical weapon. And the fact that they have it is very worrisome because they could use it not just to kill one person, but they could use it in a much larger mass attack. For example, that little perfume bottle that was found in the dumpster in Salisbury that was used in the assassination attempt against Sergei Skripal had over 10,000 lethal doses. So those two covert agents, somewhat hapless covert agents from the GRU who mounted that attack in Salisbury, could have killed thousands of people.
And just as a footnote to that, Andy, a lot of people don't realize that after the Skripals were poisoned, then a lady came along and found the perfume bottle and took some of the Novichok out, not realizing what it was, and she died. So she was an innocent victim in that.
Apparently, her husband was a dumpster diver and gave it to her as a gift, and she sprayed it on her wrists and killed herself.
So why shouldn't the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, have the right to see the Russian program and inspect it? Because Russia is a signatory to the Chemical Weapons Convention.
Well, they did oversee the destruction of 40,000 tons of Russia's declared chemical weapons stockpile. And that was very, very successful. That effort was supported by the United States through the Nunn-Lugar program. We invested over $1 billion to help the Russians destroy that massive Cold War stockpile. But these smaller covert illegal stocks are not declared as they should be by the Russian Federation government. So there's really nothing the OPCW can do about that unless they're invited in by the member state, in this case, the Russian Federation, to launch an investigation of this illegal use of chemical weapons last week.
One of the reasons Russia's never going to admit this, among others, because if they admit that they have Novichok, then that's it. They're going to have to open the door to international inspections.
Yeah, they'll never in a million years admit it. And I'm convinced that they were certain that they would not get caught, especially doing this inside of Russia.
Why are you certain? I mean, Novichok can be identified by, the Brits use Porton Down, their military lab. The Germans have their own labs. Why do you think that they just never thought that Navalny would leave the country, but in the end, the Kremlin let him leave the country?
Yeah, no, they screwed it up. They thought they would quickly kill him, and he would be buried in Russia, and the world would never be wiser. But because of the pressure to release him, their failure to kill him, and his release to a hospital in Berlin, that allowed the Germans to bring samples to a very, very sophisticated laboratory that was able to determine the precise cause of his grave illness.
You alluded to it a couple of minutes ago, but people don't realize the work that you've spent your life doing and others in the threat reduction programs, that the former Soviet Union had ridiculous amounts of biological and chemical weapons. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, then they started to open their program. You helped spearhead some of the programs where scientists were even retrained so that they wouldn't, go and sell their evil ways to terrorist organizations. I mean, people don't realize that history, even though it's not very far behind us.
Well, you don't get credit for preventing a catastrophe. It's what didn't happen that's important in this case. Thanks to the vision of Senator Nunn and the late Senator Lugar, the United States, through the Department of Defense Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, invested heavily, along with its European partners, in helping Russia and the other former Soviet states, the newly independent states in the 90s, get rid of the legacy of their weapons of mass destruction. This was a decades-long effort that cost billions of dollars, and it was very, very successful because those weapons and materials and expertise did not fall into the hands of terrorists and rogue states like North Korea.
So is chemical biological warfare programs a thing of the past or of the future?
Well, I worry very much. They need to be a thing of the past. As President Obama said when he was in office, we can't let the worst weapons of the 20th century darken the 21st century. We have a global prohibition on chemical weapons, the Chemical Weapons Convention. And unfortunately, it's weakening the norm of use. The taboo against use of chemical weapons seems to be breaking down as countries like Russia and North Korea have flagrantly violated in these 3 assassinations and assassination attempts. The world needs to redouble our efforts to get rid of all chemical weapons, and same with biological weapons.
How do you stop it? How do you deal with Russia when they have essentially this propaganda line every single time: look surprised, act concerned, and deny everything?
Well, we use the truth. We use neutral OPCW laboratories to make these judgments, and we play it to the Russian public. And over time, they should be ashamed, and they won't support a regime that continues to violate these critical international norms, of which Russia is one of the founding partners.
And yet your president has just come out on the weekend and said he didn't see any proof that Alexei Navalny was poisoned. He said it was tragic, but he said we should be worried about China, forget about Russia.
Well, this fits a pattern. He's been consistently a shameful apologist for the worst excesses of the Putin regime.
We live in a time of COVID-19, so-called natural outbreak of a virus, but clearly there are some lessons to be learned about preparing for the moment that someone deploys chemical or biological weapons against a Western nation or a city.
Well, as bad as this pandemic is, and it's horrible, and here in the United States, we're suffering terribly because of poor leadership But the truth is, an attack with biological weapons could be much worse than what we're experiencing today. So I worry that the impact of this naturally occurring virus is sending a message to our adversaries that if we want to hurt the United States and its allies, we should pursue illegal, banned biological weapons.
So what's the counter message? Because if you want to cripple the American economy, if you want to even hurt the military of the United States, you deploy a chemical or biological weapon, and these weapons are far more lethal than COVID-19. What's the message back? How do you fight it? How do you identify even who deployed it?
What we need is a global effort led by the United States. Remember, U.S. leadership. I was involved in the Ebola. I was involved in the Ebola response when President Obama mobilized over 70 countries to contribute to that effort, a very successful effort to stamp out Ebola in West Africa in 2014 and 15. So what we need is, and the Council on Strategic Risks, where I serve as a senior fellow, has been working for over a year on an effort to make bioweapons obsolete. We are confident that with the breakthrough in technologies and the revolution in biology, with a sustained high-level effort led by the President of the United States, we can make this whole class of biological weapons obsolete.
How do you do that? Sorry, forgive me, but
well, what we need is a global early warning system for early detection of outbreaks. As early as the first patient who's exposed, we can sequence the viruses and bacteria, the pathogens that circulate around the world and actually map them real time now. We have technology to do that. And then what we're seeing deployed today are these rapid reaction medical countermeasures that were developed by the US military. The sequence was posted by China on the 11th of January of the coronavirus. And within days, we had a prototype vaccine and a prototype treatment for COVID-19. So while it's taking a little more time, because this is the first experience we have actually using these modern nucleic acid vaccines and antibodies in people, once they're proven safe and effective, and we're just weeks away from that, it will give us a rapid reaction capability that I'm convinced will convince our adversaries that it's not worth using biological weapons because they won't be effective. But it's going to take a sustained effort, a public-private partnership, to really invest in the defenses against all biological weapons and naturally occurring infectious disease, so we don't have pandemics in the future.
Didn't we just see a defense program cut to the biological program?
Yeah, inexplicably, President Trump and Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, in their budget request this year, cut the Department of Defense Chemical and Biological Defense Program nearly 10%. Now, of course, they did this in February, just as the coronavirus was taking hold in the world. It was a stupid move, and my hope is that the next administration will vastly increase our efforts in chemical and biological defenses.
Well, the next administration may be the same administration. And, do you think that they'll rethink that budget cut now that they're far into this pandemic and they're seeing just how devastating it is to especially America?
I can't imagine that they would not rethink that boneheaded decision. Clearly, anybody who's experiencing this terrible loss of life is going to realize that we need to increase our investments in the medical countermeasures against biological threats, whether they are engineered by a state biological weapons program or naturally occurring.
I just want to circle back to the question I asked you before, because I was a little unclear about the answer, but Russia will deny, and they'll continue to deny, and they'll be mounting evidence in the investigation that, I think we're already there anyway, that the Novichok doesn't roll around. You can't buy it at the pharmacy in Russia. The only people that would have it state agencies and state actors and you know, FSB or the GRU. So what happens? I mean, do we do sanctions? Do we get tougher with Russia? Or, I mean, how do we stop this from happening again? Because this is one in a series now.
Well, Russia will deny, confuse, and obfuscate and come up with all kinds of crazy stories explaining this simple attack. And what you described, because this is a very tightly guarded chemical weapons agent, only in the hands of the Russian state, we now have incontrovertible.
We hope.
Well, I'm confident that this is not something that's floating around on the black market. The conditions you need to store it and handle it properly are very sophisticated, and there's no reason that the Russians wouldn't place the highest security around any small stockpile of this very dangerous chemical weapons agent. So it's so damning because it can only come from the Russian government. So this was an attack by Russian security service personnel against one of its own citizens. And that's the only plausible explanation. So we need to continue to investigate as we can. I mean, there were people on the airplane at the airport, and hopefully the story will get out over time. But the most damning evidence of all is in Navalny's blood and his system. And the analysis of the chemistry of those samples proved with high confidence that a Novichok chemical weapon was used in this case.
What's the penalty for doing that, for deploying in peacetime, in wartime? It doesn't matter. I was going to say in peacetime, but in any time, what should be the check that should come due for doing something that everybody thought was unthinkable?
Germany and our NATO allies, the United States, need to band together and make Russia pay a price for this. We can't let them get away again with impunity. And whether it's canceling the Northeast pipeline, which is almost completed, or some other sanction, we need to send the message, because Putin will continue to do this, as you know he has, unless he has to pay a cost, unless he's convinced that the West will stand up to this, and that the costs of such outrageous actions will be greater than the risks of not engaging in these terrible, terrible attacks, in this case against an opposition figure.
Andy Weber is former Assistant Secretary for Defense of Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs. It's always an honor to talk to you. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Dana.